I have probably used the phrase, "it is my distinct pleasure," earlier today, but it is my distinct pleasure to introduce this conversation. I want to give a special vote of thanks to Liz Engelman, who has become Supergirl today. She has agreed to do everything she's been asked to do, and she's doing it brilliantly. And I know that the conversation you're about to hear is going to be one that is memorable, if not unforgettable. So please, ladies and gentlemen, give your attention to Liz Engelman interviewing Sarah Ruhl.
Speaking of memorable and unforgettable, that's how I feel about Sarah Ruhl, who I met many years ago and haven't seen in about as many. So it's a little crazy. So thank you for being Person of the Year, so I could just have a conversation.
And we have the same birthday.
Yeah, we're Aquarian twins. Can you tell? I have to just acknowledge the challenge of this conversation, because I basically just want to grab Sarah and run off with her for a coffee or something a little stronger and catch up after all these years. So the challenge of making this slightly formal for you is a high one. The other challenge is for all of the 100 essays Sarah didn't have time to write and wrote, I have about 100 questions I did have time to write but won't have time to ask. So instead of most of this, because we have a truncated amount of time, I'm going to just lob a few questions to Sarah based on what she's kind of teed up already in her beautiful speech, and then open it up so you guys can have a conversation with her, and we'll have coffee later. But I'm going to pretend that we're just hanging out together in a living room, so I'm going to go like this.
If we have to do it in public, then
right.
we must.
So, Sarah, I'm curious, and I was just talking to Tori on the break, who basically was saying everything about you that you said about Paula, in terms of how you teach and mentor and use your full personhood and love for the students that you teach, and how open you are with them. And I'm just thinking about the book you just collaborated on with a former student of yours that's now out, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your relationship with that student has become the book that it is, in relationship.
Yeah, so I had a student named Max Ritvo who was in an undergraduate playwriting class at Yale, and he was a really, really extraordinary poet, and he had never taken playwriting before, and so he originally was in the no pile, and because he said he was a poet and a comedian, I said, well, we better have Max, because that sounds like a great combination. And if you put poetry with comedy, it sort of becomes a play. And Max had been struggling with a rare pediatric cancer called Ewing's, but he was in remission. And then at the end of the fall semester, he had a recurrence. And the class and I were all just really heartbroken. And Max wanted to do everything he could to graduate, which he did. And then when he graduated, he and I just became very close friends. And he would send me a poem, I would send him a play. And as his cancer progressed, we decided to make a project together to write a book of letters together. And it was partly a way to distract him from chemotherapy, but it was also just pure pleasure to hear more of how his mind worked, because he really was a genius. So we worked on the book together while he was still alive, and then when he died 2 years ago, I finished it. And it's an unusual piece of writing in that it's co-authored and it's a hybrid form. It's some letters, it's some poetry, it's some memoir. But he was an extraordinary human being, and I'm hoping it's sort of a gateway drug for people who might love Max's poetry but might not have a way in, because he also has 2 incredible books of poetry out.
Are you doing any more readings from it in New York? Upcoming, so people from here?
I don't think so. I think my next one's in Nashville. If anyone's from Nashville.
Trip, anybody? You are teaching a class at Yale right now that is the teachings of my teachers. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the 4 teachers of yours that you are now teaching your students, and what have they passed down to you that you are now passing down to the next generation?
So I'm teaching 4 of my teachers, Paula Vogel, Mac Wellman, Nilo Cruz, and Maria Irene Fornes. And we spend 2 weeks on the playwrights' plays, and then I also teach their teaching style. I teach their writing exercises. And it's the first time I've taught it, and I love teaching it because I get to revisit the teachings. And I also get to be completely transparent about lineage and not sort of say, oh, I made this all up, here it is for you. It's like, no, Paula gave me this exercise, Nilo gave me this exercise, Irene gave me this one. This is how Mac Wellman opened me up in terms of his crazy rants. And I think it's also helpful because students don't always get what they need from a particular teacher. Well, thank you so much. And so in this case, they can pick and choose, and they can say, I really identify with Irene's work and her way of teaching. And they're so different. I mean, you don't actually get to have two teachers as different as Mac Wellman and Nilo Cruz, but that was my graduate school. First year was Mac, and second year was Nilo.
Poo-poo platter of style.
Yes, exactly.
You've quoted another mentor of yours, a literature mentor, Virginia Woolf, saying that a woman writing looks back through her mothers. And I'm wondering, it sounds like these mentors are in some ways mother mentors for you. Are there others when you write that you're looking back to when you write?
Definitely. And in fact, in our last class I did at Yale, I also allowed them to bring in a teaching from someone who was important to them. And so the student, Gloria, talked about Lynn Nottage and talked about Lynn was the reason she became a playwright because Lynn wrote partly in Swahili and Ruined, and Gloria's first language is Swahili, and she didn't know that could be in a play. And so she was talking about Lynn as kind of a literary mother, and I said, okay, well, let's do this little meditation about mothers, which is a classical meditation technique. But basically, you imagine your mother, and you imagine, or a substitute mother, the idea of a mother, someone who's fulfilled that function in your life, and you imagine that you take all of their pain and suffering, and you breathe that in, and you breathe out to them all your success and health. And it's kind of a foreign concept in our Freudian culture where everything is the mother's fault and mothers just suck and we just have to get away from them, which is sometimes how I feel in our culture. Maybe it's because I'm a mother of 3, but I don't feel a particular reverence towards the concept of mothers or lineage. And I think it's partly being in a consumer capitalist economy where it's about originality, killing the father, killing the lineage, coming out with your own thing, making a huge splash, and then becoming immediately replaceable by the next, seedling. So I find that really toxic. And so this is a big digression, but I think it's great to celebrate our literary influences, our literary mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers.
You mentioned being a mother of 3, and earlier you also mentioned having twins. So that's no small feat to be a mother and juggling all of that. And you write a lot about motherhood, and you also have done so much in our community, locally and nationally, to support women writers who are mothers. Could you talk a little bit about how motherhood might have been a catalyst for you doing your own balancing and then also extending that support to other women mothers writing?
Yeah, and I haven't really done very much, honestly. I mean, I just to say, Julia, who's here from the Lilies, has done a great deal more, and I think I had gotten the Steinberg Award, and it was a lot of money, and I was so grateful for it. So I earmarked a little bit of it to give to childcare through New Dramatists and the Lilies, who then who brought in the same amount of money so that it could expand and grow. And what was so wonderful was it was used. It was really useful, and it wasn't like some $1 million grant, which La Jolla just got. It was $10,000, and it was really used. And what was becoming abundantly clear to me was that there was invisible attrition for mothers leaving the profession in their 30s and 40s because they quite simply couldn't afford to do it because it didn't equal. If you're doing a play out of town and you need a sitter, and you're making $1,000 out of town, you can't pay the sitter the same amount to do your theater practice. So I think it's something that the industry just has to come along with, and there have to be creative solutions and for both parents, for mothers and fathers.
You have written and dared people to come out as parents in the theater in a way. Have you seen a change when that's happened?
Yes, babies are everywhere in the theater now. I mean, there was that great article in the New York Times about who is it? Is it Lee Silverman and an all-female director team, and they all brought their kids. And my mother is an actress, and she used to bring me along to rehearsals, and it didn't seem radical. It just was, she didn't have a sitter, and so she brought me and thought I'd be entertained. And I was really entertained.
You just mentioned your mother, and I'm thinking about the community theater that you used to be a part of and write about and admire for the kind of the mutual understanding, communal feel of community theater, which felt like there was a real, I guess to use your words, a kind of I, thou, we relationship in that community. And you've talked about how today we so it things, we it, there's everything is other, and you've spoken about that in criticism as well, how critics and reviewers it a production rather than really try to relate to the thou in a production and a playwright. Can you talk a little bit about what you are doing in terms of trying to open up criticism in a more generous way?
Well, the idea is to create a publication that's online and to have a rotating board of editors, also to build up diversity in the critical community, and then to encourage people to write so that instead of being sort of 20% illumination and 80% opinion, you swap that and you have it be 80% illumination and 20% opinion. And that you stage multiplicity. You might have a conversation or a dialogue about a play. You might have 2 reviews of one play, and that you'd give enough space for people to really take time to write about it in a meaningful way. And because it wouldn't be only 2 reviewers docenting the whole national conversation and really have the horrible burden of seeing that many plays and have to have an opinion about them. I mean, really, it would be really taxing, I think. It would squeeze out any drop of joy I had, I think, from going to the theater. But so if you select a writer of note to respond to a play, and that's the only thing that's the only piece of theater they're writing about that year. So the dream is to get Zadie Smith and Claudia Rankin and Roxane Gay and Alison Bechdel, all of whom have said, sure, we would do that for you. So I had come to Julia Jordan at the Lilies, I think it was like a year ago, 2 years ago, and there was a lot of anger in the community about the state of criticism at that time. And so a bunch of women met at New Dramatists and just said, what could we do? And so we're slowly piecing this together. It will require a big fundraising effort, for sure.
Put that out there, fundraising
Yeah.
effort. So, again, 100 questions I won't have time to ask. I want to make sure some of you are able to also chime in if anything that Sarah said so far has sparked a question or a comment, or there's something else you want to make sure that we get to talk about in the time we have. Fran.
I know nothing about playwriting. I don't even like writing grocery notes. So I'm just curious. I always say of acting, at some point you have to open, yeah, and it's never quite finished, yeah, but you sort of take what you've had a chance to do. Do you feel that way about plays, or do you feel that I'm done, that is as much as can possibly be?
I feel I'm done when it's published. And other than that, I would try to worm my way back in, no matter what. I really would. I did a production of The Clean House last summer at Williamstown, and that play is 12 years old. But one wants to be useful in a room. So I'm sitting there trying to be useful, doing these little rewrites. And finally I thought, I think this play is done. And Liz worked with me on that play.
When it was a one-act.
When it was a one-act, like 20 years. Oh my God, that's a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi. Oh, hello. Thank you. Hi, Sarah. Nicole Hodges-Persley. We met downstairs. I just want to thank you in that moment of the names that you called were all critical Black feminist writers and queer writers of color whose voices are really important to add to the critical theater landscape. So if you don't know those writers, here, Roxane Gay, Claudine Rankin, Zadie Smith, many of you know from the New Yorker before that illustrious writing career. I just thank you for using your voice to amplify women's voices of color. And it's just really important that we change the landscape of critical consciousness and critiquing and writing about the theater. So thank you for doing that work.
Thank you for saying that. I mean, I think I've noticed, I mean, not only are mothers leaving the theater, not only is there that invisible attrition, there's invisible attrition from writers and directors of color, particularly women. And I won't mention names, but they're friends, and I was astonished to find they were so upset with the critical culture. They were like, you know what, greener pastures, I'm done. And these are luminaries. These are not struggling writers and directors you've never heard of. These are luminaries in our profession. So if we don't catch up in terms of how criticism is illuminating the practice of the art form, it's very hard for the next generation to move forward. And I think it's partly a function of teaching and seeing how some of my former students' plays are reviewed and how there are sometimes weird racial overtones, weird gender overtones that I just kind of go, if I were fighting this for myself, I might just want to lie down in bed and, just not do anything. But because it's for others and because it affects our whole profession, I think we have to kind of circle up and do something about it.
Sarah, I was present when you got the Mimi Award and you gave that great speech, which were the texts you received from your students the morning after the election in 2016. And I wondered if you could talk about if that's changed, the attitude about writing has changed, or how their writing has changed.
I think we're all figuring it out, what to write right now. What does writing matter right now? What matters right now? I mean, it's very confusing. And I think for me, to write a new play post-election required a lot of reflection. It actually required me going to an island off the coast of Seattle, to Hedgebrook, to really have enough solitude away from the noise of the world to know what I wanted to write about, because I feel so upset, enraged, and overstimulated by our culture right now. For my students or former students, they are just forging ahead. They are not besieged by self-doubt. They are just doing the thing. I mean, they're really inspiring.
Yes.
You've had many of your plays translated into different languages. Can you talk a little bit about if you've had been part of those translations and or seen the productions of those translations?
I mostly haven't, and I find the whole idea of translation so deeply moving. It's such a beautiful, humble act of generosity to translate someone's work from one language into another. It's so mysterious. So I wish I could see all of them. I think partly because I had kids around the same time my work was starting to be done in different languages, it just kind of cut that process off at the knees. I just don't go. I did see one production of Eurydice in Germany before I had kids, and that kind of made me want to keep the Pandora's box shut. It was sort of very German. And it was like long. It was 2.5 hours long. It should be an hour and a half. They'd added a character. The best is it started with a Heiner Mueller prologue. They just added one. So I haven't, but now that my kids are older and they could come with me, I would go if there were a beautiful production in another language.
Yeah, Dave.
First of all, thank you for your work. My name is David. I work at Cornell, and I did do Eurydice a few years ago. So I have a couple of quick questions about how do you know when you're making the right changes? I was looking at the script, and I realized at one point there was a grandmother in the play.
Yeah.
And that grandmother was gone by the time I got the script.
I know.
And
She had to have something to do that day in rehearsals.
And the other was the wonderful kind of stage directions that opened my eyes for a moment, such as he's thrown into the sky, or she is, I can't quite remember what it is. But how do you come about as a writer and discussing with the director your more poetic approaches, and how do you make changes where you know the changes are more or less for the positive?
It's so hard to know. I mean, I think some of it is trial and error. And the grandmother, I have nostalgia for the grandmother, and I think that I saw one production with her in it, a Madison Rep,
Right.
and then I was going to do the play at Berkeley Rep with Les Waters. And Les is a very he doesn't get involved in the nitty gritty of rewriting, but he did say to me at a point, I keep trying to understand the grandmother. I'm still not understanding. And I kind of thought, if Les is not getting it, and he's really trying to, he's a director I really respect, and it's very hard to make work, and it's an extra person to cast with a very small role. It seemed worth trying a version without her, and I think what it did is it sharpened the love triangle then between Orpheus, Eurydice, and essentially her father. So it just made crisper structural sense without her. But someday I have to write that grandmother play.
Sarah, I just want to throw in another question. I'm interested in your relationship to technology, or what you think theater's relationship is to technology in this kind of this fast-paced world that we're in today. And I had read somewhere you were saying, remember when remembering required paper, and that the mind of a writer met nature in a dead tree. I think it's such a beautiful sentence. And so I'm wondering, for those who don't know what paper is, or have forgotten that writing required it, where do you see, how do you see language evolving or becoming extinct in the work that's being made now because of these?
I'm scared. I'm scared that our language is getting really truncated, and that I'm finding also that because there's something about Facebook culture and Twitter culture and Instagram culture where you want to share your voice without receiving. And I think there now is developing a new kind of writer who doesn't like to read. They just want to kind of chirp their own song without hearing from others or hearing from the greats. And I think part of how you become a better writer is through reading. I mean, that's the age-old prescription. Like, you want to learn how to write a play, go read 10 plays this week. And how about next week you read another 10 plays, and you keep doing that. So it's a little mystifying. And I myself am a little bit addicted to my phone, so
It's complicated.
it's complicated. And I think theater is all about the cultivation of presence, and it's one of the few places you go and you don't have your phone. And it is about the body, and the body being in contact with other bodies. And yet, don't you see more phones in rehearsals now too? And more, a row of people with their technology, with the computers and and then the poor actors up there acting for people who are walled off by technology. It's not good, I don't think.
And you've contrasted before, I think, the age of opinion that it seems like we're in, versus this a more experiential age of experience where we're actually present together. And how can we be more present together in the work we make, the life we make? You recently become Buddhist, and it seems like that also finds its way into kind of the mindfulness of the work you make and how you make it. Any tips for presence that you found recently in your life?
I mean, I'm a bad Buddhist. I'm a bad meditator. I try to do it as often as I can with 3 kids. I don't do it as much as I would like, but I've done a couple rehearsal processes where we do start by meditating every day in rehearsal for 5 minutes, and it really is wonderful to kind of set focus and presence and intention for the room. But I think we all struggle with it, and none of us has an easy answer. I do think the practice of theater teaches it, though. And I was really so amazed by the Parkland student, Emma Gonzalez, who gave that moment of silence. Did everybody see that? I mean, it was so beautiful. And I thought, who is this sort of bodhisattva who came down and can do this, who can transmit, who has this pain that she can transform into this deep well of silence for all of us. And then I also remember reading, many of those Parkland students were theater students.
Right, that's right.
And I thought, well, that's interesting. I mean, maybe we are still teaching how to be present.
Is that also, I'm just thinking of the rituals that happen in some of your plays, or do you feel like that's also a way, there's a presence there or a reverence at ritual? What does ritual bring to you when you go to it?
I mean, I love a ritual in the theater. I mean, I was raised Catholic, so maybe that's why I love mysterious rituals. I don't know. I was just at someone's house for Hanukkah last night and watching all the beautiful rituals and thinking, oh, how sad to have been raised Catholic, because we don't get to do our own. Like someone, it's like farmed out to the priests and you don't get to have them. Like I've always had such a longing for ritual, and I think I get it in the theater.
Make your own.
Make your own, yeah.
Question to the left.
Yes.
One of my, well, not one, my first opportunity to direct professionally was the recommendation of the playwright. And I just wanted to know, and that led to several plays of the playwright's play that I was able to, I had the opportunity to direct professionally. I wanted to know your thoughts on, you talked about the play is finished, I'm done. Does it extend any further with, with the director, or how do you see yourself and the responsibility to the director?
I mean, my favorite directors to work with are really in a process with me where they ask wonderful questions about the play. I mean, to me, the best dramaturg and the best director are incredible question askers, including Liz, when we worked together years ago. And I think that the director who scares me the most says, I don't have any questions for you. I completely, and that's happened, and I thought, oh, that's not good, and it wasn't good. But I tend to, I mean, the publication of plays happens so late in the process, so for me, when I say a play is done, when I publish it, usually that's after 3 productions where I've been tinkering and tinkering and tinkering and working deeply with the director on the material. And the actors. I mean, I think the actors teach me so much about what's working or not working. If a really fine actor is not getting the melody, it means there's something wrong with the melody. So, does that answer your question?
Speaking of actors, what was it like to watch your mother play the role that you...
It was great. So my mother's an actress in Chicago, and when she turned 70, I wanted to write a gift for her, so I wrote her this play for Peter Pan on her 70th birthday. And it was, the reason I wrote it was when she was little, growing up in community theater in Iowa, she played Peter Pan. And I grew up with all these pictures of my mother flying, wearing green tights, and one year Mary Martin came through town, and there's a picture of them in the local Iowa paper, Mary Martin with her arm around my mother. So there was all this iconography around it. And I thought, if you're writing a gift for your mother who's an actress, you want to write her play before they die. It's not really useful later. So I wanted to give her something she could perform if she had occasion to. So she did the play in Chicago at the Shattered Globe, and it was a great experience watching her play that role.
Would you, I'm thinking about how you got into your love of theater in the first place, and as you said in your speech earlier, you quoted, you're like, I started as a rather retiring poet. So how does a rather retiring poet get the theater bug? Was it from watching your mother in the...
No, it was Paula. I was way too... I feel like I understood the theater from being in those rooms from a young age, but I didn't think I could do that. I didn't think I could be a playwright. It made no sense to me as a vocation until I met a living playwright. And I think that's why the mentorship is so important. If you don't sort of see in the flesh that someone's making a life doing this, it seems quite abstract.
I remember when Paula she'd got her signature theater year,
Yeah.
And she said, well, if I'm going to be here, I want to make sure you're also hearing from plays from my students, and making sure that they have an evening too. And it feels like, again, that kind of inspiration that she's been for you is that you're also saying, yes, it's me, but here are my students, and what a beautiful gesture.
That was so Paula to devote part of her signature season, really one slot, to doing readings of her students' work. And Paula always says a circle rises together, which I think is really a profound idea and one that she really lives in practice.
I do know that we've been running over and we're going to have to end, and so I wanted to say that this circle rises together, and so much of it is because you are here with us, Sarah, today, and I'm just so honored to be able to have this conversation with you amongst these esteemed colleagues.
Thank you all.